As you open the waiting room, I'll let the logo run, and then we'll go to the static slide.
All right, just started recording. I am gonna let folks in now. Are we ready?
Say the word. I'll let the logo.
Are we all visible once it opens?
We are visible, yes, once it's open.
All right, say when, and I'll let the logo run twice. Then I'll go to the AppSac slide and start talking with the intro. Does that work?
Totally.
Beautiful.
Okay. Letting people in.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to take one moment and let everybody be admitted from the waiting room. We've got a nice sized crowd today. We're just going to take a moment and let more folks get here to join us. Okay, it's about 3 minutes past the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you to this AppSac Zoom chat. My name is Dr. Janet Rosenzweig, and I'm wearing two hats today. I'm going to open this presentation as the Executive Director of AppSac, and then I'll come back a little bit later wearing a different hat as your presenter. First, a little bit of logistics I'd like to share. By now, everybody is probably a very experienced Zoomer, but in case you're not, we've learned a couple of lessons along the way. We find that it is much more helpful for you if you place your screen in speaker mode. What that will do is it will make whoever is speaking, it'll make their display prominent on your screen instead of seeing all several hundred tiles of everybody who's there. And then you'll also be able to see the PowerPoint slide front and center. So we suggest you do that. Everyone is going to be muted by the host. We know that many of you have your kids home and your pets there, and we hear phone rings, and so everyone is muted. But if you have something you'd like to say or something you'd like to add, please use the chat feature, and we'll make sure we get to you through the chat feature and give you the floor. As the presentation progresses, Bree Stormer, our manager of publications and special projects, Bree, if you want to kind of wave or say something, and then your picture will come up.
Hello.
That's Bree. Bree will be managing the chat area, and she will be watching for your comments, and she'll also be pushing out resources. As we speak, we'll be mentioning lots of things, and we want you to be able to link to them and find them and access them after the presentation is over. If you enjoy these Zoom chats and our newsletters and our other resources, we really hope you'll consider joining AppSac. Our members are our most important resource, and if you join shortly, you can use the discount code ZoomChat10, all one word, and get 10% off your membership. Registration is now open for our postponed colloquium. It'll be September 21st to 24th in New Orleans. And if you'd like to join us, and we hope you will, being a member, we'll give you a discount on your registration. Registration is also open for our very popular online course. Member pricing ends any minute now, July 4th. If you are a member of AppSac, you can take that entire course, all 29 lectures, for only $25. So that's another great reason to consider joining AppSac and checking out our website. And we also offer really nice membership rates for organizations that allow multiple logons. If you're in a position like many of us are, where COVID-19 has wrought havoc on your personal or organization's budget, please don't hesitate to contact us about a potential reduction in dues. You can email me, or you can email Stacy LeBlanc, our president, who you're about to meet. Bree is putting those emails out in the chat box. This is not the right time for any of us to lose access to resources that we really need. So please don't hesitate to contact APSAC about a potential reduction in your dues. I've introduced Bree Stormer. Also want to introduce Alana Feldman, our executive assistant. Alana, say some things so that you show up on the screen for a second.
Hi, everyone.
Alana will be handling all the technology behind the screen. We'll also be looking at the chat box. If you have any problems, just feel free to holler out. You can reach all of us down the road at info@apsac.org or apsac@apsac.org. And we really hope that we hear from you, that you consider our colloquium, that you consider our online course and all of our other resources. And here to tell you a little bit more is APSAC's newly elected president, live from New Orleans. We've got Stacy LeBlanc.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for all that you do and for supporting APSAC during this difficult time. Please know that these things are not possible without the work of Janet and Bree and Alana. We have such an amazing staff who have done an extraordinary job of pivoting, but we need to hear from you. So please consider doing our survey online and let us know what more we can do for you as professionals in the field to help support you during this unprecedented time. Today, I get the honor and pleasure, and I don't want to take up much of our time and tell you about how much I love APSAC and the work that we do collectively, but I really want to focus my energy today on telling you about my friend, colleague, and about our executive director with APSAC. She is the force behind all of these with an amazing staff. And she has so many degrees. She has degrees in family studies, health education, social work, and public administration. She got her master's in health education, earned a certificate in as a sex educator, and took a job as the first CAPTA-funded child sex abuse program in the country, which was located in East Tennessee. A few years later, she actually worked in Texas, where in the early 80s, she played an integral role in developing sex abuse programs throughout the state of Texas. From there, she went on to New Jersey, where she lives now, and earned her PhD in social work. She helped start one of the first child abuse commissions in the state of New Jersey. She spent many years as a public official in state and county human resources, and has always kept at least a focus in child maltreatment. In 2001, she joined Prevent Child Abuse New Jersey as the executive director, and she went on to work with Prevent Child Abuse America as the vice president of research and programs. She managed the National Technical Assistance Centers for Sex Abuse Prevention. In 2010, she took on another public role with the governor with Chris Christie, and she was named as the commissioner for the Department of Children and Families in the state CPS agency. Her credentials as a sex educator made her a target for people opposed to the governor and set the state in a kind of a bizarre Senate confirmation hearing. After that publicity and about the importance of speaking out to children on sexuality and to keep them safe, Dr. Rosenzweig decided to write a book that not only explains why it's important, but is filled with great resources for parents. And, you know, her book, The Sex-Wise Parent, was published in 2012, updated, and as a paperback version, which was updated in 2015. And she now donates these books, the proceeds for the books, to APSAC. So if you order the books through APSAC and not on Amazon, you get a discount on the sales price, and you'll hear about her book today. And APSAC keeps the entire sales price. So we really appreciate Janet's commitment to APSAC in helping us deliver services to all of you. I'm going to ask Bree to put a link so that you can see how to get Janet's book. And I think you will appreciate how much you'll need it. I will tell you, I am a proud owner of Janet's book. We were going to present together at Colloquium in March. I had picked it up at Chadwick in January, brought it home, and I wanted to read it. I had it on my coffee table. And my personal story that I often have told Janet about is my children came home from Mardi Gras, living in New Orleans. All the college kids came home with all their friends. One had 16 friends, the other had 11. I had lots of air mattresses left over from Katrina. And at some point in time, I enter into the kitchen and I see Janet's book is on the counter, and my kids are actually being teased a little bit about, tell us about your sex-wise parent. But it left open a huge conversation about it. And I so appreciate that this book actually allowed me to talk to my college kids and their friends about sex. And every time I listen to Janet, I learn from her. So it's a real treat. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Janet to give her all of this time. Thank you so much. And if you guys could all join me in welcoming Janet to the floor. So back to you, Janet.
Thank you, Stacy. I just want to make sure our technology is working. Everybody can still hear, correct? Yes, I see the few faces I can see on the gallery view. I hear yes, that's beautiful. Okay, so you've heard a little bit about APSAC. Okay, we publish, we educate, we innovate, and it's a wonderful organization, and I urge you to join it after.
One doesn't work at all.
Okay, after 35 years in this field, I have found a home at APSAC, and hope others feel that they can do that as well. Let's see, are the slides? There we go. So as we get into today's Zoom chat, APSAC's been doing a series of them. I hope some of you have joined us before. Today we'll be focused on promoting sexual health and safety during the COVID-19. This is the basics that those of you that are getting CEUs, you needed to make sure that you've got your peer-reviewed references, the event description. And if you are here for CEUs, and many of you are, you'll get a link at the end of this presentation that will take you to a post-test, because in order to get your CEUs, you need to get 7 out of 10 questions on the post-test. So please watch for that email and make sure you take that. We're offering both psychology and social work CEUs. Today, we will learn some key facts about anatomy and physiology as they relate to promoting sexual health and safeties. Hopefully, you're going to leave with some good materials and resources that you can bring to your families and communities that you serve. And maybe we'll get into some discussions about the difference between privacy and secrecy and how to integrate these concepts into our work. When we do a Zoom chat, you know, this pandemic has changed almost every aspect of daily life for people. The first part of the Zoom chat, I'm going to talk about my perspective and some basic issues about preventing child sex abuse and promoting sexual health and safety, which is a more generic term, a more broad term that I think says even more about what we're trying to do. And then the second part of the presentation will focus on the potential challenges and opportunities that the pandemic brings to parents. My perspective, as Stacy told you, I came at this work as a sex educator, recruited to work on one of the first federally funded child sex abuse programs in the country. I always come at my work as working in child sex abuse from that perspective as a sex educator. And I point out that the first thing I published on this topic was back in 1982, before I bet at least half of you on this call were born. It's interesting to say, but I had a chapter in one of the first textbooks on family violence. I did a chapter on human sexuality issues in the treatment of child sex abuse. And a lot of those concepts that we put out in 1982 are still considered kind of innovative today. So that's the perspective I'll be coming from. When I'm doing a longer presentation, this we're going to keep as close to an hour as we can, we talk about the fact that child sex abuse has at least 3 ways to define it: a clinical definition, a criminal definition, and a civil definition. Today, for the most part, we're going to focus on some of the clinical definitions, which really in the broadest sense means, does someone feel as if they've had a sexual trauma in some way. It's not the criminal definition, which every state specifies exactly what that act needed to be and the age difference between people. It's not the civil definition, which involves, your child protective services. We're really talking about the feelings that are involved with feeling as if you have been assaulted in some way, which can mean very different things to different people. We can't talk about the clinical without giving good old Sigmund at least a minute here. We owe a lot of the repression and why people did not believe victims for a long time to our good friend Freud, because when he was doing psychoanalysis and had people on the couch, and he would hear from people that they had sex with a parent, instead of comprehending that someone had been sexually violated, he kind of popularized the concept of the Oedipal complex and the Electra complex, that it was a, quote, normal part of development that people would have a sexual desire for the opposite sex parent. And then when he would hear these kind of claims that this happened to me as an older child or an adolescent, he just diagnosed everybody as having unresolved Oedipal and Electra complexes. So do Oedipal and Electra complexes happen? Some people believe they do, but when a 13-year-old says that her father forced her to have sex, that's probably not an unresolved Electra complex. And so we sort of owe it to him that we need to move on from there. CAPTA, the major piece of legislation that created our system, created a lot of different definitions of child sex abuse that we all need to keep in mind down the road. But I want to move right into one of the things that I think is the most important thing when we talk about promoting sexual health and safety, and that is empowering adults with the skills they need to be able to talk to the kids in their lives about healthy sexuality. And I like to put that in a strategic perspective, because when I started this work in East Tennessee in 1978, of course we talked about human sexuality as it had to do with child sex abuse prevention. Of course we talked to parents about how you talk to your kids, and we went around and we trained the staff at youth serving agencies. So if you've got a group of kids on the basketball court and you hear them talking, about sex, how you as the staff can bring a healthy message in. And we brought it to girls clubs, so that if you've got a group of kids hanging out on beanbag chairs talking about which boys are hot, the staff were trained in how to take that discussion into healthy sexuality. And then something happened in what I have come to call the neutered 90s. We had the first Sex Offender and Registration and Notification Act, and sex abuse prevention became about checking registries. Adults, like people like me, who used to curl up on the floor of girls clubs of Dallas with the kids and, take out line drawings of reproductive anatomy, like the ones we're going to see later. I mean, it became an environment where someone like me would have been afraid to do that with kids, because we were afraid of being falsely accused by a child or a parent of having an inappropriate discussion with a child. The consequences of being labeled a sex offender became very, very serious, including a lifetime registration. Abstinence only sex education funding started in 92 with major money behind it in 96, and it limited the topics that people could talk about if you were accepting this federal money. And one thing that a lot of people don't remember about that is abstinence only education was not just education funding was not just offered to schools, it was offered to youth serving agencies. And for many of them, as other funding sources dried up in the 90s, it became their lifeblood. So all of these coaches and youth services workers that were fabulous sources of information for kids, they couldn't do it anymore. They were just unable to have those conversations. And then we had the whole Joycelyn Elders fiasco in 1994, where we had this eminently qualified, the first African-American female Surgeon General of the United States, appointed by Bill Clinton, with, a resume as long as a mile of all of her accomplishments. She got forced out of office because at a National AIDS Day conference, a reporter asked her if she thought masturbation was an appropriate alternative to talk to kids about. So because you can't get AIDS from not having a partner, and she agreed with the reporter who asked the question that of course that's a good alternative, to a safer alternative to having sex with a partner. Within a few weeks, she was vilified for, for wanting to teach kids about masturbation, when all she had done was responded to a question saying, is this a safe alternative, during a conversation about AIDS. So here's this eminently qualified Surgeon General forced out of her job for saying that masturbation is okay. And one of the unintended results about all of this stuff is that, oh, where is my slide? The unintended result is that adults stop talking to kids about sex. So before we go on that, I just want to spend a second also in the 90s with, here's our story of Jocelyn Elders. You need to know, all of us need to know that sex offender registries do have an important part in law enforcement in helping them find potential suspects when an offense has happened in a community. And we don't want to take away that importance. But study after study have showed us that sex offender registries really have no impact on prevention. And they became, millions and millions of dollars were poured into them as a prevention tool in the 90s. And we now know that they don't have an effect on prevention. I think Bria's got this resource that she'll be pushing out for you, as well as a couple of others. The bottom line is there's no impact on rates. There's additional research on that. Bria will be pushing this link out to you as well. So then we have to ask, and one of the other things that the 90s did is it pushed people who felt as if they needed help because they're attracted to children, it pushed them underground. So a really effective type of prevention to have available was the original project Stop It Now, which was originally initiated to give people who felt themselves sexually attracted to kids, to give them an alternative. By contacting this helpline, you can get help without fear of legal ramifications. But then we had prosecutors actually threatening to charge, and anyone who spoke to someone, allowed them to remain anonymous, threatened to charge those people with failure to report. So while we've got really good initiatives still happening in Europe, like Project Dunkelfield, which I suggest that you might want to Google, we have nothing like that right now in the United States, where someone who finds themselves attracted to kids could reach out. Excuse me. This resource is a story that was first on National Public Radio that talks about the trauma that a family has to go through when they're trying to find help for their adolescent son who believes he's attracted to kids. And I really suggest that if you go to the page on this link, scroll down, I think it's the third story, is called Help Wanted. And I suggest you check that out, because when we talk about comprehensive prevention, preventing offenders from offending is really, really, really so important, at least as important as teaching kids how to protect themselves. So the applications to our work is making sure people know that registries are not effective prevention tools. And when people come back at prevention folks asking us for evidence-based interventions, I like to remind people that registries are not evidence-based, yet we spend $1.5 billion on them every year. So the result of the neutered 90s is adults stop talking to kids about sex. Many adults stop talking to kids about sex. Who didn't stop talking to kids about sex are people who are sexually attracted to kids, or people like pedophiles, hebephiles, ephebophiles that are, I just, pardon me for 1 second, let me see if a sip of water will get rid of this frog in my throat. I get so excited talking about the subject that things get away from me. So I think that should help a little bit. So I really believe that sexual health and safety starts at home. Excuse me. The earliest and most important primal lessons learned about human touch, self-worth, empathy, relationships, pleasure, pain, all of these messages are learned at home, and they all set the basis for future sexual health and safety. When we're talking about comprehensive prevention, I like to talk about the Center for Disease Control, their comprehensive prevention. This addresses all 4 levels of the social ecology. They say we should be looking at the individual, the relationship, the community, and society. In this conversation today, being specific to the COVID-19 issues, we're going to talk about level 2 of the social ecology, which is family and relationships. So this is where we'll spend most of our time. In a comprehensive prevention seminar, we would go all through the social ecology, but today we're going to stay at level 2, which is the family. We're going to talk about sex-wise parenting and how it begins at home, values and norms and accurate information for all, and know that healthy sexuality is a key component to family life. Ooh, there we go. Let me share a little bit of research as parents as an important source of sexuality information. We know that parents consistently underestimate the influence they have on children's decisions about sex. Bree will be putting the link out for you for this resources as well. Teens continue to say that their parents have a big influence on their sex, but on their decisions about sex. But by comparison, just 20% say that friends most influence their decisions. But we also know that from that same report that parents generally overestimate the amount of information their kids get from health education classes. And we know that parents underestimate how much value kids put on their opinions. So these kind of statistics can be helpful if we're trying to help parents understand that talking to kids about sex, especially teens, is not futile because they listen. Little kids will listen to them anyway because adolescents don't start shifting their frame of reference from the family to the peer group until adolescence. So we know that parents have their kids' attention when they're little kids and pre-adolescents, and even when they're teens, parents' opinions still have some meaning. We know from other research on child sex abuse prevention that most parents agree that teaching sex abuse prevention is necessary, and children won't bother to learn about it independently. Very few parents have learned about sex abuse prevention themselves, and therefore don't feel very well equipped to talk about it with their kids. We also know from other research that parents feel very comfortable. Some of their most important sources for sex abuse prevention information are media and pamphlets obtained in doctors' offices and friends and spouses. There's also other research that tells us that the internet, contrary to popular opinion, the internet has not killed the paper pamphlet. Parents are always happy to leave a meeting with something they can take home from them, to print out something they find online, to pick up something in a waiting room at a doctor's office or a clinic or in a faith-based organization, and they like to take this stuff home with them. It makes them feel as if they've got a good resource. So the internet has not killed printed material. We know that between 25 and 79% of parents talk about sex abuse prevention with their kids, but we know that almost across the board, it's stranger danger messages that prevail. And we know that the overwhelming majority of sex abuse happens between a child and someone they know. And when you drill down really further, you're going to find so much of the sex abuse that happens to kids, the perpetrator is another peer. So we think about the fact that while we do have to be concerned about pedophiles and hebephiles and ephebophiles, who are people whose primary sexual attraction are to children, adolescents, or teens, and this category of abuser very carefully plans a seduction event. We'll try to lure a child online. We'll go through the grooming that we've all heard so much about. It's equally important, if not more important, to recognize how much sexual abuse to kids happen by peers or teens. And in most cases, that happens not because of this kind of long grooming planned out, concept. Rather, it is poor judgment, meets opportunity, coupled with adolescent hormones and the fact that their brain is not fully developed and they have lousy impulse control. So we can't talk about sex abuse as kind of this monolithic stranger danger. It's a continuum of events with a continuum of type of people that might be involved with the abuse. How can we help parents to do a better job? And we'll, with or without COVID, there's a lot of different things that we need to do. We can educate physicians who serve children and families about all of the resources available from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Bree is going to be putting these out for you in the chat box. If your agency has a contract with the Channing Beat series, that's CHANNING-BETE. They've got several pamphlets that I recommend, mainly because I'm the co-author on several of them, on teaching healthy sexuality to prevent child sexual abuse for kids of different age. To do a shout out to our friends at Prevent Child Abuse America. I believe they still get a portion of the proceeds of those materials, and they're really good materials, so you could support sex abuse prevention while getting some great materials into your community. We can, here we go. I'm going to take a slightly different tack for a second and mention the fragile family studies. The fragile family studies are these longitudinal studies that have been going on for probably 20 years now, where they look at the impact on family development when there is only one parent in a household. And what they found is that at the time of the birth, most parents in these families had high hopes that they would stay together and high hopes that they would get married, but were just not able to establish a stable union. And within 5 years of birth, a third of the fathers have virtually disappeared. What's the tie-in to what I'm talking about here with healthy sexuality? There are lots of folks that work with families, and if we think in our own lives, the period after a child comes into a family is a very difficult time for any couple to reestablish their life as a couple and their own sexual identity, their own sexual relationship. One of the things that I think is critical to promote sexual health and safety across the board is recognizing the role that we can have as professionals in encouraging and supporting families and supporting the grown-ups in the family to have a healthy sexual relationship. And this is important for so many reasons, including the fact that we know that kids from families with one parent are at a higher risk for abuse and exploitation. We know that if there are both parents in the family and their sexual relationship has fallen apart, the kids in that home are at a higher risk of being exploited by one of the parents who is not having a healthy sexual relationship with their partner. So pandemic or not, how can we support that healthy relationship between the grown-ups? And one of the models that we talk about to do that is the PLICIT model, which is an acronym for permission, limited information, specific suggestions, and intensive therapy. Was developed decades ago for those of us working in human sexuality to tell us that something like 70 to 80% of sexual problems within a couple or a family can be dealt with just by giving people permission to be sexual and limited information, basically anatomy and physiology, psychosexual development, things that you need to know to improve your sexual health and safety. Very, very few problems actually require specific suggestions or intensive therapy. This is a tool that we can offer parents. We can model the permission to let people talk about their sexual questions, to talk about their sexuality, and provide the limited information, on what we need on how to promote sexual health and safety. Permission, one of the important things within permission is articulating family norms. What do we mean by family norms? Norms are the expectation on how we expect people to behave. Everybody comes into a relationship expecting that a friend will behave in certain ways or a partner will behave in certain ways. And part of building a strong relationship in a family is articulating what are the kind of norms that we think are important. Within a family, for example, we might want to talk about norms we'll use for body parts, norms we use for urination and defecation. I always caution families not to refer to the genitals as the dirty parts, but rather if you don't want to use the medical name, maybe use the term private parts, because at least that brings a good message. We want to, oh, that's a repeat. Which slide is okay? Sexual health and safety is enhanced when we give kids the appropriate level of language about each of their body parts and what that specifically means. We want to have norms about dress, and as we talk about the pandemic and people are home more, we may find ourselves being a little bit less careful about who sees whom in what state of dress, who sees whom in their underwear. This becomes increasingly important when a child approaches puberty or when new members are entering a household. This is very important during the COVID crisis, is one of our norms about privacy. Who gets to have the private time when, in families that maybe are sheltering together in rooms where everyone can't go to a living room or a den or a bedroom, who gets to have privacy for how long, if only a little bit of privacy is available. How will we handle all of these issues about making sure everyone's got the privacy that they need and deserve? Before we leave families, just want to talk a little bit about siblings, because older siblings, we know, are a really important source of information about the facts of sex, which hopefully will be the correct facts, and the different kinds of family values. Some parents actually go as far as to engage older siblings as a partner and sharing information with the younger ones. But we also know there's another side, and that older siblings can be terrifying bullies. In fact, when you look at some of the research on siblings, the oldest child in a birth order, particularly if that child is a male, statistically has got about, that's the birth order and gender most likely to turn out to be a bully, and parents can work to make sure that doesn't happen within their family. What we want to look at is when bullying starts within a family, when kids fight, which is totally normal, especially when they're all home together. It's really important for parents to kind of make a determination if the younger or smaller or child, the one being bullied, is mad or terrified. Mad is fine. We want, mad people get mad at each other. Terrified means you might have a problem. You don't want kids scared of anybody in the household. It indicates that somebody might be abusing their power. That's something we might think of now, for example, when the only way we're keeping in touch with folks might be virtually, if they're talking about what's going on at home. Anger, frustration, boredom, we can get that. Real fear or terror is a different emotion we want to keep an eye on. But going back to the siblings, one widely cited study found that 13% of a college population reported sibling incest, and that kids at the age between 12 and 15 seem to be at the highest risk for impulse-driven sexual act with younger kids. That means they're not, this is not the predator that sat there and thought, oh, how can I get this 6-year-old alone with me? This is saying that, kids between the age of 12 and 15 have very poor impulse control, have a lot of curiosity about sex, and appear to be at the highest risk. So just something to keep in mind when you're working with families where they may be at home together during the COVID crisis, that, that particular age group is one particular demographic we need to watch out on. What are some of the risk factors for perpetration? Many risk factors are linked to norms. For example, norms about engaging in victim blaming, having hostility toward women, having gender role adherence, an over-acceptance of violence and hyper-masculinity are all norms which, if those norms exist within a family or a social group or a community, can be a risk factor for perpetration. So we do want to make sure that when we're working with families to help articulate their norms, that these norms do not become embedded in a family. So our goal is parents who can tell kids names for body parts, the difference between privacy and secrecy. I just want to stop on that one for a minute, because right now with COVID, we've got lots of issues about family privacy and family secrecy. Privacy, if we're trying to explain the difference between privacy and secrecy, privacy means I can do something by myself, but my parents or the people I trust know that I did it. I am going in my room, I want to be by myself, and I'm going to have a conversation with my best friend, right? I want that it's not none of your business what I'm saying to my best friend, but you as my mom know that I'm in my room having privacy. Secrecy means nobody knows about it at all. One of the ways I urge parents to, an analogy to teach their kids if they, the difference, is using toileting. Privacy means you're old enough and big enough to go to the bathroom all by yourself and shut the door. You've earned the privacy, right? But if something is wrong when you're in the bathroom, if your pee is a funny color, if your poop doesn't come out right, you're going to tell me, because what you do in the bathroom is not secret. So helping kids understand the difference between privacy and secrecy is really important. It's something that we can coach as professionals, we can coach parents to do, and that can be something that really helps them understand, helps parents communicate to their kids that it is not okay to keep secrets, but it's okay for certain things to be private. But private means mom or dad knows it's happening, you just get to do it by yourself. Right? Secret, not so much, especially long-term secrets. Last point I want to get out on this slide before we get into some more COVID specific issues, it's very, very important that we all understand that sexual arousal is an autonomic function. The human, any mammal, but we're talking about humans now, genitalia respond in a very specific way when a specific thought, feeling, memory, smell, image, something comes into the brain, whether it's visual, imaginary, what other sense, and that experience sends a message to the cerebral cortex, right? The animal functioning part of your brain, which then sends a message through your spine to your genitalia. And if it's male genitalia, there'll be a penile erection. If it's female genitalia, there'll be vaginal lubrication. That's the normal way the human body functions. And the key to remember is that arousal is autonomic. We can't tell it when to start. We can't tell it when to stop. And it's nobody's fault, right, but your own. One of the things we hear from kids, from people that perpetrate, particularly these adolescents with poor impulse control, if they experience sexual arousal, they blame it on the person that was there when their arousal began. So it's really important for folks to understand that sexual arousal is autonomic. It's normal, and it's ain't nobody's business but your own. That sexual arousal is one of the things that kids can take in private, which becomes an issue again as people are stuck at home together during the COVID crisis. So I'm going to skip through a couple of other slides because I want to make sure that we get to some COVID specific stuff in the last 15 minutes. I do want to share one of the things I recommend are these line drawings. You can get them at my website. They'll be available and when you download these slides, but these very, very simple drawings I had commissioned by a medical illustrator that very carefully show the important parts of the male and female sexual and reproductive anatomy. They're also in the book, Sex Wise Parent. You can Xerox them out and use them with families. They are fabulous for discussion starters, right? Because, for example, we can explain, when you look at the anatomy of the penis, that there's special tissue in there that gets all filled up with blood, and that's what helps make an erection, that there's special glands inside of the female genitalia that make them lubricate, and this is all normal and it's all healthy. And these kind of drawings can be used with kids as young as 6 or 7, but I recommend those of you start by using them with parents and make sure that they're all on the same page around sexual anatomy and physiology. So this particular slide, I encourage you, if you download the slides, to go ahead and copy it and use it. One of the things that we find is a real issue with, particularly with adolescents, is that they mistake arousal for love, particularly girls. Boys, when they feel arousal, they understand that something is happening to their penis. A lot of girls who no one have ever talked to about arousal think, oh, this must mean I'm in love. And this is exactly the phenomenon that makes adolescent girls such easy prey for predatory teachers, the hebephiles and ephebophiles, whose primary attraction are to adolescents and teens. That's such a risk factor for an adolescent to not understand that just because her body's getting all warm and fuzzy in certain places, that does not mean that that cute teacher in front, that 28-year-old teacher in front of the room is the love of her life. All it means is that her genitals are acting exactly the way normal teenage genitals are supposed to do. So really helping make sure kids understand that is just so critical. And another slide that we're going to see is one of the things we know is that even pediatricians who talk to kids about their sexual development, they'll talk to girls about menstruation, but even pediatricians are not talking to either gender about sexual arousal, and no one is talking to boys in the medical community. So we've got our key issues is making sure people know anatomy, physiology, sexual response, sexual arousal, and family norms. You'll find, and Bree is going to put the link to this out, I've got a really good exercise that you can use if you're working with families, if you're doing family groups on Zoom, if you're doing work online. These are great discussion points that you can put out with people. Some of these things I went through on earlier slides, but you'll see this. And having families, suggest that families sit down together and talk about what are our norms, how are we going to handle these different things. That's a really great way to have open discussions about sexuality and start getting sexual health and safety right there in there with your family. But let's get specific with some of these basic concepts and talk about what all this means during a pandemic when people are stuck at home. We know that we're concerned about the increased risk to kids that we hear about, the increased number to helplines, kids that are stuck home with potential predators. But while we're taking this time to talk about prevention and sexual health and safety, we've also got some opportunities here. They're avoiding other known risks. I urge you to read Charles Shakeshaft's report on sexual misconduct in schools. Bree is going to push that link out to you now, whereby the most conservative definition in her meta-analysis, we find that 5% of kids experience sexual contact. By the most liberal definition, that number goes up over 50%. Right, so we know that there's risk in schools, and we know from multiple studies or multiple crises that kids are at risk in youth sports and in youth serving agencies. And I just wanted to share, just as one example, this is a parent toolkit that I helped write for the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. So if you do want to switch gears at some point and help parents keep their kids safe in sports, please grab this toolkit. But we know that while kids are home, they are avoiding certain risks. And we also know that we have some great opportunities because parents are developing some increased intimacy with their kids right now. And while we don't have anything in the peer-reviewed literature yet, because the phenomenon is too old, wonderful stories are showing up in the popular media about how parents are finding these great new opportunities to parent. And I just grabbed one out of, I think this was in the Washington Post, but there's great stuff coming out now about how much closer parents are getting to their kids, how much intimacy is developing. And I'm particularly struck with some of the things I'm reading about how fathers are discovering a whole new aspect to their parenting. This is a perfect opportunity for us to remember the PLICIT model, where people need permission to be sexual and limited information about what that means. Here's one opportunity we have during COVID is to support the grown-ups that we're concerned about. Whether in our life, in our clienthood, grown-ups still need to have their own healthy sex life. As we were saying before in the fragile family studies, clearly a healthy sexual relationship between the grown-ups in a household is an important component to family well-being. And if you have to think about how you can help parents steal, I don't know, I hope it's more than 10 minutes, but if that's all they've got, how can they make that work? And if you have to kind of volunteer to get on a Zoom chat and play a special game with your best friend's kids so the other grown-ups can get 10 minutes to themselves, we have to think that way, because keeping parents healthy and keeping parents happy and together is important. So how do we give grown-ups permission to be sexual in a healthy way? And if they have to be healthy individually and find their sexual release, with masturbation in a restroom because they don't have the time, we can't ignore that the grown-ups in a family have sexual needs and they need to take care of themselves. We hear that old put on your own oxygen mask first. For some clients, coupled or single, this link here, which Bree is going to push out, is some really frank publications from the New York City Health Department about how to take care of your own sex life, during COVID. But another great opportunity we've got right now is parents can communicate with their kids. They can share accurate information. They can share family values. They can share resources. Again, they underestimate themselves and how important they are. They can lead family meetings together and determine and clarify their values. They can direct their kids to resources they approve of, and they can share good information, the limited information of the implicit model. One resource I think parents might want to share with their teens is Sex, Etc. You would never know to look at it, but it's university affiliated. It's affiliated with Rutgers University, but it is edited and primarily promulgated, by teens, for teens, but there's plenty of professional supervision behind that. So that's one resource the parent can pull out. Parents should be aware that the AAP has this whole thing on adolescent sexual health that parents might read themselves and feel comfortable directing their kids to. We're pushing that resource out now. And then here, I talked briefly before about boys. Remind folks that boys need information too, and dads can get involved in taking on this role as being sharers of sex information. We know that this is the study from the Academy of Pediatrics that say that even pediatricians are more likely to talk to girls than they are to talk to boys. So I'd like to kind of one of the resources that we push out all the times are the National Sexuality Education Standards. I think we've got that resource available for you and the parents that you work with can look at those resources as well. But as we're getting close to the top of the hour, I just want to kind of back up a little bit and see, Bree, if we've got any questions that have come in that you'd like me to address.
I have not seen any questions in the chat. I've been pushing out a lot of resources though, so if someone did have a question and I missed it, you can feel free to post it again, or you can private message me, whichever you prefer.
So, yes.
So we have a question, could this presentation be adapted for foster parents?
I certainly do have a version of this presentation that was developed for foster parents, yes. There are, at this point, probably 100 versions of this presentation ranging from 5 days to 30 minutes. So and with foster parents, one of the issues that I found when I used to do foster parent training, they're such an important group because we know that for so many kids, rejection is their norm. I mean, for kids that end up in foster care. And kids who act out sometimes have a tendency to kind of be able to find a foster parent's hot button and then blow another placement to reinforce their self-image of being unlovable. And for many parents, and a case that I worked with, foster parents, they were even able to deal with the child being a fire starter, and they were able to accept that. But then when the kid began to sexually act out, that was the hot button that blew that foster placement. So working with foster parents to be able to understand that sexual arousal is autonomic, that there are healthy ways to deal with it, that it can interfere with foster placements is really important, and I'd be happy to help anybody who wanted to do that kind of work. Other questions?
Yeah. Oh,
I was just going to add, and thank you, Betty Wade, for that question. And if you have ideas of how we could get this information for foster parents or maybe CASA folks, or we would be thrilled to try to schedule that to help foster parents. The other thing I wanted to comment is I've been monitoring the chat also, Bree, and I see that we didn't have a question, but Jennifer Grady gave 2 great resources I wanted to point out on the National Center on the sexual behavior of youth. We work very closely with that team, and they have so many great resources dealing with sexual behavior problems in youth and the new terminology about and how to address that with our teams. And she also gave another great resource for on sexual health and trauma on the NCTSN website.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
I got another question that came in privately, so I want to make sure that one is addressed. What advice do you have for people working with conservative families or even working within conservative agencies?
Great. I love that question. While researching the sex-wise parent, I can tell you unequivocally that every mainstream religion in the United States, regardless of denomination, recognizes a parent's right, if not responsibility, to talk to their kid about sex. That's exactly why I focus my work on supporting parents, because while many people say, schools shouldn't or youth agencies shouldn't, and it becomes political, there's no mainstream religion that doesn't recognize that it's a parent's right, if not responsibility. So we're supporting parents' rights. We are providing parents with resources, and I would encourage folks to take a look at that. And there's some really good writings about that come from religious denominations, but the easiest answer is that it is supporting parents in their doing the best job they can. It's not interfering with their rights. And it's, a key component of healthy family life, and healthy family life is always such a top priority in even the most conservative organizations.
Thanks. We've got, I know, a couple, we don't only have a few minutes left, and there's quite a few questions coming in, so I'll share those with you after the session. But I think this one is interesting in this moment. During telehealth appointments, what should we ask families?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Let me think on that for a second. I also want to say that I can stay at least 15 minutes past. So if people do have to drop off at the top of the hour, if folks want to stay, we can keep this line open at least for 15 minutes. With telehealth, you should be asking, if you're talking to the grown-ups, it's a broad question, but if it's just kind of a general kind of check-in, you should ask them how they're doing. You should, along with asking them how the parents, how other aspects of their health is, you could ask, are they able to maintain their sex life? Just like you're able to, ask, are you able to maintain your diet? Are you able to maintain your exercise? Are you able to maintain your sex life? So that's an important question. With anyone that you're talking to, if you ask the question, how's things going being home with your family? If you see fear, that would be grounds to take the conversation a step further. If you see, again, anger or frustration, that goes with the territory. But any response to how are things going with your family that shows any type of fear ought to be grounds for additional intervention. That's kind of a quick answer to a broad question, but in a nutshell, not being afraid to say, how is your sexual life going, along with how's your nutrition and your exercise, I would recommend that would be okay. Okay, Bree?
Thank you. Yeah, another question, and I know we've addressed this in some other sessions, so I can send the links to this, but how do we raise awareness of cyber sexual harassment?
Yeah, I purposely stayed away from that on this call because we've done one workshop just on online sexual health and safety, and there's going to be another one in a couple of weeks. So please come back and join us for that. It is certainly an issue. What becomes an issue for me, again, I'm going to leave this slide up for a second, is it's the sexual harassment is the issue, as well as the fact that when kids see things online and they experience arousal and they don't understand that that arousal is no more meaningless than the goosebumps they got when they got tickled, we can be setting a stage for later sexual dysfunction, for later problematic sexual behavior. So as well as the sexual harassment, for the purposes of where we're trying to focus today, I think the key thing to be able to communicate to folks and with kids in age appropriate ways is that sometimes your body's going to experience arousal and it doesn't mean anything. Just because your penis got hard or your lady parts felt warm when you saw something violent on the screen does not mean that you want to have sex in a violent way. Right? It means you shouldn't watch that stuff anymore because nobody wants to see any violence being done to anybody, but it is absolutely meaningless in terms of viewing sexuality. So kind of really helping kids and grown-ups understand that arousal doesn't mean love, and some things you're going to see online may make you feel aroused, or sometimes, seeing your sibling accidentally naked in the bathroom when you're all stuck home alone might stimulate arousal, but all that means is your body is doing what bodies do. And what separates humans from other animals is we think before we do what our bodies think it wants to do.
Thank you. Do we want to, for those who have to leave, close out real quick and then answer questions for those who are able to stay?
Sure. If folks who do need to leave, I see the numbers are going down a little bit. We will be making a video, we'll be making a recording of this available on the APSAC website. The Zoom chats can all be found under, I guess, on our video. Bree, tell them about our new video page.
We do have a new video library page available on the website, so I'm going to post the link to that right here. And that has all of our Zoom chats as well as webinars that we've done with the New York Foundling on some evergreen issues like TFCBT with foster children, psychological maltreatment. We had a ACEs one with Vince Folletti that was wonderful. And then we've also got some colloquium plenaries that are there, and some media ready micro sessions from our 2018 colloquium, these nice 7.5-minute presentations if you want something short and sweet. So those are all available. And I've seen a couple of people asking for resources via email. Following every session, we do send a link to the video recording, the slides, and all resources via email. So you will have all of those.
Okay, and Bree, if you would one more time put out the link where they can order a copy of The Sex Wise Parent or the updated paperback. All of these resources, we sell it for below retail, and APSAC keeps all the money. And almost all of the materials you saw here, you can Xerox out of the book, all of the kind of discussion guides with parents and kids, and it's a little bit of a fundraiser for APSAC. So please feel free to do that as well. But and remember, those of you taking CEUs, watch your email for a link for your post-test. You've got to complete your post-test and have stayed on. If you're gone, it's too late. You have to have stayed on for the whole 60 minutes and complete the post-test to qualify for your CEUs. Next question.
All right, this is not an acronym I'm familiar with. Can you talk a little bit about CYACS?
That is not an acronym that I'm familiar with either at the moment. So if the requester would spell that out, we can come back to that.
Okay, and then I've got another one, and I can't find it right now, but it was something a little bit different than telehealth with parents if you are a mandated reporter and you're having virtual meetings with children, what should you look out for?
Interesting. We also did a Zoom chat on that a couple of weeks ago, and that Zoom chat is up where we had experts addressing that specifically. And this particular group of experts is also doing a longer term project where they're surveying people as the field becomes newer and we get more experience. So Bree, perhaps if you could push out the link to the Zoom chat where we had the experts talking specifically about that. Again, I'm going to stick with the concept of if anybody looks frightened, again, right now, boredom, fear, boredom, anger, annoyance are par for the course. But if anybody is frightened of anybody in their household, when you mention the name of anybody in the household, that's really the key to take it from there. How to determine if it's a reportable offense, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. The same kind of skills that you would use when you were talking to kids, and kind of go back to any training you've had in interviewing, because we know from our forensic interview training, we want to make sure we're not leading questions or, using inappropriate language with kids of different ages. So just your general interview training to make sure that you get the information you need in an appropriate way. What some people are doing is whenever, like what teachers are doing, is they're from either their Zoom class, they're setting up a private room where any individual child could get one-on-one time with the person who's leading the class. I'm not 100% familiar with the technology, but I think it's a way of using Google Hangouts or creating a separate Zoom room so that anybody who's working with kids by doing virtual stuff, virtual education, can also make a safe place where the kid can get in touch with that person individually without other people hearing or seeing that conversation.
Thank you. We also have a question about families with deep shame that have a hard time talking to their kids about sex.
Yeah. And that's the P in the PLICIT model, is the permission. And, shame comes from sense of inadequacy. Shame comes from not understanding. Shame can come sometimes, I don't want to say from the spiritual side, but from a dogmatic religion side, that we can address the shame with knowledge. We can address the shame with love. We can address the shame by role modeling, coming from a place of authority as the healthcare professional in their life, that there's nothing but shame there in sexuality. There's beauty in love and sexuality. It creates the very family that we're all here to talk about. And that's the whole P in permission. And when we remember this PLICIT model says that something like 70 to 80% of sexual problems can be dealt with permission and limited information, it is just so pervasive. It is just so pervasive. And it's not the kind of thing we're going to be able to address in a Zoom chat. It's helping families work through their shame really comes from the unconditional positive regard that we as a professional should have learned to show our clients in that clinical and therapeutic and even educational environment, that we're wholly accepting of you and your sexuality, as most likely is the person who's, you consider your creator, whatever your faith-based entity is. That the fact that you were created this way in the spirit of nature often really helps people kind of, when you move from the dogmatic religion to the more esoteric spiritual, is really one helpful way to help addressing that shame as well.
All right, thank you. And then I got clarification, Child and Youth Advocacy Center. I knew CAC, but not CYAC.
Oh, okay. So what was the question?
I think it said can you talk a little bit about Child and Youth Advocacy Centers? So I guess my understanding would be their role.
Well, I'm going to turn that. I would love to, but just to hear another voice, I'm going to ask our friend Stacy, who spent a big part of her career in advocacy centers and turning her child advocacy center into one with a good prevention orientation. So do you want to take that a little bit, CACs and sex abuse prevention?
So certainly, children's advocacy centers all play a role in preventing upstream and to getting out in schools and helping families. But I think that this is also an opportunity when we have our families, just like we talk about that your child is here and has a you know, your family advocates are communicating about how this is another ACE or an adverse childhood experience that we can certainly talk about, just as we would prevention with body safety in the schools, to bring this conversation. And I love when Janet talks about that, you know, we tend to start to think that we don't need paper. This is something where it's really nice to have a pamphlet about this, the book out there. I always had Sex-Wise parenting in my office, and it's just a great thing that people can grab in private, not in secret, but that they can look at their own, or they can take a brochure and put it into their purse or bag or pocket to take away. And I think of this in the same way about how we can't avoid talking about physical discipline as a potential risk factor. So if we think of it in those terms, there's so many opportunities to incorporate it in your family advocacy program. And Janet, you may have some ideas about how family advocates, pediatricians, forensic interviewers, intake folks, and all the important folks that work in CACs and on the multidisciplinary team can incorporate this.
Of course, you know that I do, and I've had the privilege of training CACs all over the country and doing full-day workshops, and you know, those of us at APSAC are always happy to do that when the training world is back to where it was, because CACs can play a really important role, and many of them now are getting out into their community doing prevention work. I'm going to segue just to share something that kind of hit me out of the blue when a clinician shared it with me. And this clinician said to me that you prevention people make my job harder, because because parents that have heard about prevention, and then something terrible happens to their child gets abused, that one of the family traumas that comes into child advocacy centers are parents who feel guilty that prevention, there's so much prevention out there and I didn't protect my kid. I was surprised to hear a clinician say that was, you know, that was one of the reasons she, you know, found prevention a little bit difficult sometimes. But I think we have to be aware at a child advocacy center, those of us that work more on the treatment side, to make sure that we balance the necessity with prevention and all the things that we can do, but balance that with the fact that we can't control everything, and you know, we can do what we can to make our family sexually safe and healthy, our child get all the protective factors we can, like language about sexuality and safe, stable, nurturing adults that they can talk to. But that sometimes, even when we've done everything we can, lightning is going to strike. And then how we can get together and kind of, one of the things that I feel very strongly about is working to change the social norms so that victims don't feel the shame of having been victimized, right? And that's particularly the case when kids, and someone brought up sexual bullying and sexual harassment online. You know, one of the worst traumas for a victim of that is not only the betrayal of the person that took their photo and put it out there, but the fact that they're now shamed by the entire community who knows that they've been victimized. So how can we work to reduce the shame of having been a victim, reduce the shame a family feels because their child was victimized? And one of the ways we can do that is by working to change the social norms, that this is, you know, lightning strikes, it's a terrible thing, but we're going to be safe, stable, nurturing, resilient community that supports everybody that's been victimized, and not stigmatize them from being victimized, and help them move on. And I give that to CACs because, so, you know, mostly who you're seeing are people that are in the system because of victimization has occurred. So I think we have time for one more question, Bree, if there is one. Bree, you're muted.
I think we got through all of the questions, actually. So I think we are all good.
Well, that's perfect because it's 15 past the hour. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. If we can bring any kind of information or training to your community or your organization, you know where to find us. We can't wait to be back on the road with our materials, and we have so many good training opportunities to bring around. We hope you stay in touch with us and join us for our subsequent Zoom chats. There's Bree's going to push out the link of the next ones that are coming up. Please drop us an email or we don't evaluate these Zoom chats, but we really want to know your opinion, any feedback. And Bree, if one more time you could put out our survey link, we really want to hear people's opinion about what else APSAC can do to help you bring value to the families and communities you serve. So thank you so much for your interest in my materials, supporting parents to promote sexual health and safety. Thank you for helping, giving me the opportunity to develop material specific to COVID-19. And I hope you join us all again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.